Good morning, everyone. The Moodcourt Society, Law College Dehradun, Faculty of Uttaranchal University, welcomes you all for today's session under the banner of First National Online Lecture Series on Contemporary Legal Issues. The topic for today's session is Masterclass on Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Today, we are delighted to have with us Dr. Charu Mathur ma'am, Advocate on Record, Supreme Court of India, as our guest speaker. We welcome you, ma'am. I also welcome Professor Dr. Rajesh Bahuguna sir, respected Dean, Law College Dehradun, and officiating Vice Chancellor of Uttaranchal University, and also the patron of Moodcourt Society. We welcome you, sir. I welcome Professor Dr. Poonam Rawat ma'am, HOD, Law, and Chairperson of Moodcourt Society, Law College Dehradun. I welcome President, Vice President, members of the Moodcourt Society, and most importantly, the participants who have gathered here for today's session. Before starting with the session, I would like to introduce our speaker to all of you. Dr. Charu Mathur ma'am has a rich and diverse experience on corporate, commercial, civil, criminal, and constitutional matters. Ma'am is a regular practitioner before the Honorable Supreme Court and has represented parties like cricketing bodies, educational institutions like IIT Jodhpur, NLU Jodhpur, BPUT Odisha, Maharana Pratap Agriculture University, Gujarat University, private engineering and medical colleges of Gujarat and Odisha. She has also appeared for grandson of Nizam of Hyderabad and high-profile matters like HRSP Steel. She has developed the key content on GST and insolvency and bankruptcy code. She is a registered GST practitioner. She is an object-oriented person who tries to provide apt and practical legal solution to real-life business issues. Now, I humbly request our Dean sir to kindly address the gathering.
Yogi.
Yes, sir.
Today's keynote speaker, Dr. Charu Mathur, Advocate on Record, Supreme Court of India, Principal of Law College Dehradun, Dr. Poonam Rawat, President of this Moot Court Society, Anna Anupriya, its Vice President, Mohammad Danish Khan, Convener, Mr. Rahul Kumar Sharma, and Secretary Gauri Agrawal, and today's host, Yogi Chaudhary, all the participants from different universities in India and abroad. I'm taking this privilege to extend my greetings to all of you. And I welcome you all on the behalf of Law College Dehradun, Faculty of Uttaranchal University, and also on the behalf of Moot Court Society of the college, the body which is responsible to organize this first national online lecture series on the contemporary issue. After 4 successful days, today we are in the 5th day, and the topic for today, as is selected by the society, is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. I think this is the most contemporary issues as on date. And in most of the university not being taught directly, but in fact, this is one of the issues upon which we all must be updated in the sense to well equip us while appearing for different competitive examinations, as well as while appearing for placement before the corporate sector and others. And this is what is the vision of Law College Dehradun, to discuss all those issues and topics which could not be discussed either, or which are not normally discussed directly in the classrooms. And most importantly, we are listening this direct presentation and speech from the eminent lawyers of Supreme Court, those who are not only well in the field of law, but the topic they are discussing is in particular their expertise. So with this, I would like to welcome Dr. Charu Mathur from the bottom of my heart on the behalf of entire Uttaranchal University family, and not taking much of the time, over to Yogi Chaudhary for invitation of today's guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Without any further delay, I would like to request ma'am to kindly take over the session.
Thank you, Yogi. First of all, my sincere thanks to the Law College Dehradun faculty of Uttaranchal University for inviting me for a session. I am grateful to Dr. Rajesh Bhagunaji for kind introduction and having me. Right. I also thank Poonam Rawat ma'am, who is the principal of the Law College. I thank the Moot Society. I thank all the conveners. I have met only Rahul in person last year, and I think I met Yogi also. I would like to meet you once the things get normalized. And the topic that you have selected is very contemporary. And the brief that was given to me was that I have to introduce the topic to you, to just give you the general framework of the Act. Now, as you know that Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016, you must have heard a lot about it in the news item, in the press and everything. So this is one act which has brought in the paradigm shift in how the debt is to be recovered and how the restructuring is to be done. The predecessor of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code was the SICCA Act, which is a Sikh Industrial Revival Act, was used to be done under the SICCA. Now the problem was that when SICCA was there, the management, which was not able to manage its the company itself, which we call corporate debtor, right? So it always remained in the control. The idea behind the SICCA was to revive the company, to give opportunity to the existing management to revive. Now IBC has brought in paradigm shift. So earlier it used to be based on the debtor's profile, that you have to bring the debtor out of the debt. Now with the paradigm shift, it has shifted towards the creditor. It has become now creditor centered. Now, why do you think that such a paradigm shift was required? See, the reason was there was mounting NPAs, non-performing assets. The loans that banks were giving, it was giving to a huge amount of debt to the from the various public sector banks. So you can say that large amount of money was stuck in the system. As you know, for any economy to work, money needs to circulate, right? If it gets stuck, then that becomes a bad debt. So if you look at the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, you need to look at the objectives for which it was incorporated. So as most of you are the law students, I would like to suggest that whenever you approach any subject, reading commentary, reading judgments is a good thing. But what I suggest is you pick up the Bare Act and then you start reading. Like whatever I do, I prefer to start with the Bear app. So when you will open your Bear app, not just on the PDF, the proper Bear app, you will find something which will give you the objectives, the statement of objects and reason why this particular act was incorporated. So if you look at the IBC, it gives you three objectives for which it was incorporated. First is for the maximization of the value of assets of the corporate debtor. Second is to promote entrepreneurship, and third is to make the credit available and balance the rights of all the stakeholders. So I'll explain you each one of them first. See what used to happen when the debt used to become bad, right? Money used to stick. Companies were running into all the assets. Like if there is a factory of a corporate debtor, right? Say there is a steel company. So all this plant and machinery was rusting in their factories till you come out with some restructuring. No people were able to get the work. Workers were laid off. There was retrenchment and things like that. Second thing was the money was stuck in the system. So bad debts were bad. The money was not coming back to the banks. So if the money is not coming back, they were not able to give loans further. So money was stuck. So for this purpose, IBC was enacted, and the idea behind IBC is to have the time-bound disposal of the assets. So Arun Jaitley, when he was the finance minister, and he said that if you take a companies under the SICA Act, that is Sikh Industries Act, then you go to BIFR, right? And then AIFR. So if you get a stay order from the BIFR, nobody can touch the assets of the company. It remains whether it rusts, whether it employees are thrown out of the job, nothing can be done, no harm could be done to the management. So Government of India, it came out with the IBC, and it was done in a record time of almost 1 year. From the inception of this act, it was done, to give you a brief history, Dr. N.L. Mitra was the first one who made the study about the why SICA was bad, and it submitted the report to the RBI. Then there is this T.T. Vishwanathan sir, he made this report, and he suggested the entire framework. Now in this framework, it was put before the parliament, there was a debate, and it was notified, and by December 2016, this act was up and running. And I'm very happy to inform you, by this act, 3.5 lakh crores rupees, which was already stuck in the system, I've got back into the system. So with giving you this background, let me just give you what is the scheme of this act. Now under this scheme, there are two terms that you will be hearing very often. One is called the financial creditors, and another is called the operational creditors. Now financial creditors are just like your banks, etc., which gives you loan, right? And the operational creditors are like your suppliers, which supplies you with the goods or services. Now section 4 of the act, it gives you when you can trigger process under the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So up till now, before this lockdown, the limit was if there is a default of 1 lakh rupees, then you can file a case under the IBC. Now this limit has been increased to 1 crore rupees. This is very important thing that you need to remember. If there is a default of 1 crore rupees, then you can file a case under the IBC. Now why, you can say that I can go to civil court also to recover my dues, right? Why I should go under the IBC? The reason is it is a specialized act. This is an act which works under the time-bound manner. So earlier there was a limit of 180 days plus 90 days for resolution of the corporate debtors debt, but now it has been increased to 270 days plus 90 days. So within a year and a half, things should get back, the money should come back to the system. Now to start with, how did it all start? So RBI came out with the list of 12 corporates which have defaulted, 12 biggest corporates which has defaulted, and they are generally referred as dirty dozens. So in this you had SR, you had JP, and you had few more. So the first case which ultimately came to the Supreme Court was Innovative Industries, and I will be telling you about that. Before I start, I need to give you three pairs of terms which you need to understand. So when I talk to you about insolvency and bankruptcy, many people still confuse between the terms insolvency and bankruptcy, and then they use it interchangeably. Now, insolvency, as we speak, insolvency is a financial state, right? When you cannot pay the money. It could be a temporary state, like today we are in the lockdown, I might not be having the liquidity to pay all my employees, right? But I do have assets and I can pay off the thing. Whereas bankruptcy is a statement coming from the court when a person is insolvent, he is not able to pay his debt, he is taken to the court when there is a default. Earlier the default limit was 1 lakh, today it is 1 crore rupees. And court issues the notice on that, and court declares you that this person is insolvent and he cannot pay his debt. So this court process is known as bankruptcy, and a person is declared, or a corporate is declared, as a bankrupt. Now, before I go and tell you about the second term, one more important thing that you need to learn about the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is, though it addresses to the both corporate debtors as well as the individual defaulters, but right now the portion for the individual defaulters is not notified. So whenever I'll be talking to you about the IBC, it will be limited to the corporates only, right? And that is the resolution you will be hearing the acronym CIRP, which is Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process. Now, after making the term insolvency and bankruptcy clear, and I hope it is clear to all of you, I'll move to the next pair of terms, which is the financial creditor and the operational creditor. Now, there is a financial creditor is the one which gives you the loan amount to the bank, like bank, and there is a definition also given of the financial creditor under the Act. So this is a very big and a massive definition as to what qualified as a financial creditor. Just give me a minute. So financial creditor is the one to whom financial debt is owed, and it includes a person to whom it has been legally transferred or assigned. So this becomes important because when you work in a corporate environment, and as you will be working in some of the corporates, you will be coming across something known as assets reconstruction companies, or ARCs. See, these are the people who basically buys debt of you at a discounted price. So if there is a debt, they will buy from you, they will negotiate, and then they prosper by buying debts of the people and repaying it, and they get the asset which is rich in a proportion that they are investing the money in. So whether the debt is assigned or if it is transferred, that will also come under the financial creditors. On the other hand, you have got the operational creditors. Operational creditors are those people who are supplying goods and services as well. Then you come to the term financial debt and the operational debt. So operational debt is you have provided services to the people, you have provided goods, and you are not able to pay, right? Suppose I have supplied to a builder cement, right? And I am not able, the builder has not made a payment for that, right? So what I will do, I can take him to the NCLT for this. I can ask him to be declared bankrupt because why? He is not able to pay my debt. Similarly, I can be providing internet services. The bill has mounted to 1 crore rupees, they are not able to pay, so I will take them to the court. The next is financial debt. Now, financial debt means a debt with interest, if any, which is disbursed against the consideration for time value of money. Now, why I am reading you this definition is because you need to understand what do we mean by the term time value of the money. It is very important to understand this concept of time value of money. What do we mean by the term time value of the money? Now, time value of the money is a key term that you will be, if you have studied economics, you will be knowing what do we mean by time value of money. The time value of money, it is a fundamental concept of finance. It is the idea that the value of money will depreciate as the time lapses, and to retain its attractiveness, money you need to invest it so that it enhances its value. So according to this value of time value of money, money is available at the present time is worth more than the same amount in the future due to its potential earning capacity. This is the core concept of the finance and which you need to understand clearly. So if you deposit 1 crore, if a bank gives you loan of 1 crore to a company at a 10% rate of interest, so after the 1 year, it is entitled to get 1 crore and 10 lakh rupees. What does this mean? This means that in the period of 1 year, your money has increased by 10 lakhs of rupees. So to qualify as a financial debt, you need to see that it is the loan that you have given that would have increased. So if you have given somebody loan within in your family without any interest, or if you have given it for a charitable purposes, then it will not come within in the financial debt, and hence you cannot take under the person under this category. Now with this, it is very clear that the banks gives or any other commercial institution which they give loan, the idea behind that is profit motive. So you have the time value of money that the value will increase. Now for whether something qualifies as a financial debt or not, very interesting case came was that of the JP. You know, JP is a builder, prominent builder, and it was developing houses, right? So question arose, where will the home buyers go? Like they are giving you certain amount. See, when the houses etc. are constructed, the people take loan from the bank or they take it out from their savings and they give to the builder as a construction linked plan. So if you have said that till the first floor is raised, I will give you 10 lakhs. Till if it is reached till 10 floor, I will give you another 10 lakh. If it is at the finishing stage, I will give you this much amount of money. And when this money is given, the builder puts in this money and starts the construction. So question arose, where will these people will go? Because JP Infratech was declared as was one of the defaulter under the dirty dozens. So the question arose, where will the home buyers go? So an amendment was brought in, and as on date, home buyers are considered as the financial creditors, right? So you need to understand the three terms: insolvency and bankruptcy. Insolvency is just the financial state. It is temporary, it can be reversed. Bankruptcy is court stamp. You are told by the court that you are a bankrupt. It is a stamp from the court, right? Second term which we need to understand is the financial creditors and the operational creditors. And the third pair of term is the financial debt and the operational debt. Now with this, let me move to how do you start the CIRP process. Now there is a different process which is given for initiating this corporate insolvency resolution process for the operational creditors, and there is a different process for the financial creditors. So I'll first start with the operational creditors. In case of operational creditors, you need to give a demand notice is to be served. So when a demand notice is served, it has to be attached an invoice against which you are asking for the debt. So, and if there is something known as information utility, which the government has started, where the records of the debt is kept. So, any detail if you have in the information utility, you have to attach that. There is a format which is given, which is to be followed. It is given under the rules that you have to give them a demand notice asking them to pay the money. You give them 10 days time to pay the money or dispute it. However, if there is any legal matter is pending or arbitration is going on, or if there is a suit is filed, then you cannot take that entity for corporate insolvency resolution process. Then it has to go through that particular mode which is already going under. Here you need to remember, okay, I'll come on that on the second time. So when you send you send the notice at the registered address of the corporate debtor. So if the company's headquarters is in Delhi, but it is registered in Surat, just like SR Steel, then the notice is to be sent to the registered office. Wait for the 10 days from sending of this demand notice along with the invoice, etc. Then the notice has to, if it is not replied, then you can file the case against that corporate in the relevant NCLT. Now, when I say relevant NCLT, see, NCLT has also got the jurisdiction. So, for Delhi, you have got NCLT Delhi. For Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, you need to go to NCLT Ahmedabad. So that way, all the NCLTs have got their own jurisdiction. There was, in fact, a dispute, like if the company was registered in Chandigarh or in Gurgaon, then the jurisdiction was earlier of NCLT Delhi. So NCLT Chandigarh fought, and they said that it is a part of Haryana, though it comes within an NCR region. But if the company registered in Gurgaon, you need to send matters to the NCLT Chandigarh. So you have to look at the jurisdiction, and how do you decide the jurisdiction? By looking at the registered address of the company. So once the notice is given, demand notice is given, and if the payment is not made, or if there is a legal dispute pending, then you don't proceed further. But if there is no legal dispute and the payment is not made, then under section 9, you file an application before the NCLT. The notice is given under section 8. And when you file the petition before the NCLT, you need to give all the details, like what was the time period when the default was made, what was the default for, and you have to substantiate it with all the documents, like invoice and all. So the major part is the strong documentation that you are required to make. The second aspect is that of the financial creditor. So for financial creditors, you can file it directly before the NCLT, that is without giving notice. You file that this is the default made by the corporate debtor and this is the amount. Now, when you file under the section 7 for financial creditors, there are a bit more stringent rules that are required to be followed. A new breed of professional called insolvency professional has come into being. I will be talking to you about that as well. And when this thing, you need to give the name of insolvency resolution professional also. It is more stringent in the terms that you need to give them the complete details of the default by the various financial institutions. It has to be certified by them, and it has to have an affidavit of the financial institution as well. Apart from that, if you as a financial creditor, you can move not only for the default if done for you. Suppose there is an industry, say SR Steel only, and it has taken loan from ICICI Bank, from IDBI, from SBI, from HDFC, from HSBC. Now that it has made default only in the case by the loan given by, say, HDFC. So even if the default is in respect of HDFC only, even SBI or ICICI or IDBI can also take SR Steel, the corporate debtor, to the court. So it is not only if the default is in respect of your debt, right, for the credit that you have given, but even in the case of the others, you can take them to the NCLT. So once the matter goes to the NCLT, and now it is very important for you to remember the timelines. So when the matter goes, it goes to the registry. Registry checks for the default. So it defects, it tells you that these are the defects. So within in the 7 days of notifying the defects, you need to rectify them. If you don't rectify them within in the 7 days, then it has to be thrown out. So time limit is very important. Once the notice it is being defect has been removed, then within in 14 days NCLT has to hear on the admission. So what it has not to do the complete fact finding, it has to look at the broadly that prima facie there is a default and hence it has to admit it. Now once the NCLT admits it, whether it is for the financial creditor or for the operational creditor, it issues something known as, along with the notice, it issues moratorium and it appoints uh, the IRP, which is your insolvency resolution professional, and simultaneously it asks the IRP to give notice in the leading newspapers, English as well as in the vernacular language, saying that this company has gone for the corporate insolvency resolution process, and it asks from the public to give the various claims. So there are various forms which are given in which you have to fill your claims, and then this IRP will collate everything. Now the second thing that happens is the moratorium. Under section 14, moratorium is applied. Now what do we mean by the term moratorium? When the moratorium is applied, then all the cases against that company, against that corporate debtor are stopped. No further proceedings can take place. Now, time and again, various cases have come before the Supreme Court also. They have traveled up to Supreme Court. Whether the moratorium is against the corporate debtor only, or does it extend to the guarantors also? So Supreme Court has held in the K. Vijay case that moratorium does not apply to the personal guarantor. After the judgment of the Supreme Court, there has been amendment brought in, and it specifically gives under 14(3) that moratorium does not apply to the personal guarantor. Next question arises, what about section 138 cases, check bounce cases? Do they also get stopped? So the court have answered that criminal proceedings are separate, they don't get stopped. It is only those proceedings, the civil proceedings where there is an impact on the assets of the company, where there is an impact on the relationship between the financial creditors and the corporate debtor, between the operational creditors and the corporate debtor, that moratorium will apply. Now, once the moratorium is also applied, what happens? So the management of the company, it remains not in control. Instead of him, one person, insolvency resolution professional or IRP, becomes the de facto and de jure head of the company. He becomes the CEO of the company. Remember, IRP is always an individual. Now you must be wondering, how can one individual take care of all the concerns of the company? So IRP is backed by the secretarial staff that he has got. The job of IRP is to collate all the claims and to see that the company functions as a going concern. You need to understand the concept of what do we mean by the term going concern. Going concern means only management is shifting, but you try to keep the company moving. So whatever the essentials that are required by the company, he has to ensure that they are running. So this becomes a very tight situation for IRP, and this is where his creativity will come into place. So nobody will be giving loan to the company which has gone into insolvency process. You are running short on finances. Management will be hostile to you. So will be the employees. Management will obviously be hostile because you are taking away their business, something that they have created. So he has to see that whatever assets it has, they don't depreciate. He has to ensure that the debtors, not just the financial creditors, but the other operational creditors, etc., employees, government dues, they are also taken care of. So he collates all the claims. Within 30 days, they have to submit the claims. He collates it. Then there is something known as Committee of Creditors, or COC is called. Now, COC comprises only of the financial creditors. So this, and their voting share is proportionate to the debt that they have. So if there is a total debt of say 100 crore rupees, for example, and there is ICICI Bank which has given 30 crores of loan, HSBC has given 20 crores, SBI has given 10 crores. So the voting share of the first bank will be 30%, second will be 20%, and third will be 10%. What do we get by the voting share? Voting share gives your right to say you can modify the resolution plan as per which is the most beneficial to you as a financial creditor. So when the committee of creditor is constituted, its first job is to, it is first meeting is chaired by the IRP, which is your uh, insolvency resolution professional, and then they vote him to appoint, then this committee of creditor meets and they appoint somebody more permanent, which is called RP or resolution professional. Many times, and most of the times, it is the IRP which becomes the resolution professional. So IRP's first job is temporary for 30 days to see, to collect all the forms, to form this committee of creditors. And if the committee of creditors have confidence in this IRP, they make him RP or resolution professional. So once this committee of creditors is formed, which is primarily only of financial creditors, then they decide what and how to go about. Now you must be thinking what happens to the management. So after many court cases, it is decided that they can sit and watch the proceedings, but they don't have any right to vote. So management is totally out. Now what this committee of creditors do, it calls for resolution plans. So initially there was a hiccup that the same management was coming back, and after the banks have taken a haircut. So these are some terms that you need to understand. What do I mean by the term haircut? Haircut means suppose your loan amount is of 100 crore rupees and with interest you have to get around say 150 crores. But you say that it cannot be got, the best that we can get is around say 70 lakh rupees. So you take a haircut of 80 lakh rupees. You say that otherwise I was not getting anything, but because of IBC at least I am getting 70 lakh. So what many corporate debtors started, that they started becoming resolution applicant. So had they been in the position they had to pay 150 crores, but now they said that I pay only 70 lakh rupees and get my companies back. All the court cases, everything is gone. So this is the best deal that I can get. So the court says, and in fact after the amendment also, they have come out that a person who is the management, he cannot be the resolution applicant. Further, there is a section 29A which was introduced by amendment, and it says that any resolution professional, any resolution applicant, if he is making any resolution application, if he is submitting any resolution plan, then in that case also he has to ensure that there is no debt which is on him or with the related parties. Let me explain you by an example. In the SR Steel case, there were two parties which had come. One was ArcelorMittal and another was Neometal. So ArcelorMittal, as you know, it is promoted by Lakshmi Mittal, and Lakshmi Mittal is an Indian. He has one more company. He has us. Can you please stop the messages which are popping up? Right. So thank you. So the thing is, coming back to ArcelorMittal, so I was talking to you about Lakshmi Mittal. So he had some other companies in India where he was partner at one point of a time, or his brothers are still partners. One of such companies was Uttam Galva. Now Uttam Galva itself was under the debt of around 700 crores rupees. So Supreme Court said that I will consider your application only if you pay that debt. So Lakshmi Mittal had to pay 700 crores of rupees to bid for SR Steel, which he has to nothing to do with. Right? But because he was a related party, he had to pay the same debt. Same thing happened with the Sajjan Jindal also. To promote, allow him to bid, he had to pay. So even before SR Steel could resolve, the bank got around 1500 crore rupees back in their coffers so that resolution applicant can even apply. Understand that their plan is not even approved of, right? But still, to become eligible, they have to be clean, that there is no debt not only to them but also to their related party. Now, SR Steel, their Saikan Revant Ruya, he tried to come back through another company. But it was detected that his wife was related to the company in which there was through which they were trying to bid for the SR Steel. So you realize that the corporate structure that a client has, it should be totally free from the corporate debtor. So this is one more aspect, and one more aspect before I take you to the next concept is that companies, they themselves voluntarily say that this is a debt, I cannot pay it, this is a default I am making, so please declare me bankrupt. That is under the section 10 of the IBC, where you can go for the voluntarily voluntarily declaration of the corporate insolvency resolution process. So many companies are doing it because they find it beneficial that if there is a haircut, they will get the benefit. Now, coming on to the further point, what happens when the resolution plan is submitted? So once the resolution plan is submitted, it is assessed by the committee of the creditors. It is first assessed by the resolution professional and he put it before the committee of the creditors. Committee of the creditors votes on it, right? And if they approve, only that resolution plan goes ahead. So you must have seen in the case of JP that there have been bids by Suraksha, by two more NBCC and all. So it is only when the plan which is approved by the committee of creditors. So again, as I was telling you in the beginning, it becomes creditor centric. So committee of creditors is by the financial creditors and they decide how to take it forward, which plan is best for them. But while assessing the plan, there is something known as waterfall mechanism which is given under the Act. Under section 53, you have to take care of the operational creditors also, right? Even though the plan is finally approved by the committee of creditors, which is by the resolution, which is by the financial creditors, yet care has to be taken for the workers of the companies, government dues, as well as for the operational creditors. So once this period of 180 days there, the resolution plan is submitted to the NCLT and then they approve it and the the process starts. If a person is not satisfied, he has right to appeal to the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, NCLAT. Right now we have got NCLAT only in Delhi, But as was asked in the Swiss Ribbons case, which is the leading case on the IBC, another branch of NCLT is very soon going to come down south also. So, and if you have not satisfied with the NCLT, you can appeal to the Supreme Court, right? So these are the broad contours of this. So if the resolution plan is not approved, if there is a dispute, then company goes into liquidation. And the first moratorium ends when the resolution plan is approved or the company goes for the liquidation. Once the company goes for liquidation, there is a fresh moratorium that is applicable. Then you get the valuation professionals coming, valuing the company, selling it, buying the assets, finding new sellers, and that is how the company, without winding up, the management changes. Now, to go further, as for you as a law student, you need to understand that with IBC there is a new profession which has been opened to you. That is of IRP. And IRPs earn really handsomely. Now, there are two routes to become IRP. One, if you are a lawyer, CA or CS or a MBA with the 10 to 15 years of experience, you can become an IRP after writing their exam. The second route is provided by Ministry of Corporate Affairs. They have started some program called Graduate Insolvency Program. Now there is an age limit. Only people under the age of 28 can write this exam. This is a very niche program. It just takes around 40 students per year. At the time of the lockdown, when most of the people are throwing people out of the jobs, there is a demand of GIP professionals. They are taking it and they are paying them stipend of rupees 1 lakh per month when they are only interning with them. But this is an expensive course. As I understand, its fee is around 10 lakh of rupees, and it is done under the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs at Manesar. They have their main building and the office. It is a 2 years intensive course. People from all the big four companies, from the various law firms, and even the from the foreign universities, professors come and they come to teach here. So they train you completely to become an insolvency professional, and they are looking at these people who are starting at the maximum age of 28. This is something which you can take it immediately after your law exams also. It is against an entrance test. You can look at the IICA website for this GIP program. So this is what is broadly about the IBC. And to govern IBC, you have got a Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board. IBBI is there, which is the governing body. Then there are insolvency professional agencies or IPAs. These are again the bodies which governs the IRP. So this is all the broad process of the framework of the IBC code that I can give you. There is lot more to tell you. If you require, I can come you and I can take you in detail discussing case laws and everything. And for the benefit of our legal fraternity, I have developed an online course also on the essentials of the IBC as well as on the filing procedures. And I'm trying to make videos for cases also which are coming, which I believe will be beneficial for all of you. This course is available on ebclearning.com. It is by my name only. You can go and check out those courses also. So I think I am done. I'm open for the question and answers.
Thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful session. So I would be putting some questions. Kindly, please answer them. The first question is, what is the purpose behind changing the liquidation process of company from Companies Act to Indian Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code?
Can you just repeat the first part?
Ma'am, what is the purpose behind changing the liquidation process of company from Companies Act to IBC?
Right. See, the idea behind, if you look again, go to the jurisdiction aspect. So winding up petitions were earlier presented to the High Courts, and later all these matters have been transferred to the NCLT. So for the pending matters, you need to make an application under Section 434 of the Companies Act, and then the matter got transferred to the NCLT. NCLT is a specialized tribunal which deals with the company matters, right? So the purpose for shifting liquidation from Companies Act to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Court is the matter of specialization only. In the high courts, you have got judges which may not be specialized in the company law, but in the NCLT, the technical members that you get, they are from the finance background only.
Okay, ma'am. Next question is, the IBC has been suspended for 1 year. Do you think it is going to benefit the sectors considering the present pandemic?
See, IBC, the suspension of IBC, there has to be a notification, there has to be talk about that, which is still ongoing, and they will suspend it. Uh, it is a tough call. Like if you ask for the industry specific, as you are asking, industry has taken a hit. The effect of this pandemic will be felt for long. So I think 1 year is too much of a time that is being given. Maybe it's like they have already increased the default limit from 1 lakh to 1 crore of rupees. So if you look at the stats from the NCLT, you will find that 60% of the cases before all the NCLT was by the operational creditors, where the debt was usually of a very less amount, right? Of 5 lakh, 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs, and it is only in the big cases that you have debts running into 5,000, 6,000 crores of rupees. So I think it is a double-edged sword. So if you say that moratorium is applied for 1 year for any proceedings, one aspect is looking that it is very good for MSMEs, that they will not go for this pain of liquidation and everything. On the other hand, these MSMEs, they also get some raw materials from other people, or they sell it further to the other people. They will also not be able to recover it, right? I am a small trader. I supply you 1 crore worth of goods, right? And you are not paying me. Now you can sit pretty for 1 year. I am happy that nobody can take me to NCLT, but at the same time, it is a double-edged sword. I also cannot take my defaulters to the court. So right now, I don't think how the pandemic will unfold, but I think 1 year is too long a time.
Okay, ma'am. My next question is, can you please tell how corporate restructuring helps in reducing debts of corporates and how far is it successful?
See, corporate debt restructuring or CDR is a specialized process where you negotiate. There are two things. Suppose you have a debt of say 10 lakh rupees and you have to pay 1 lakh rupees every month for 10 months. So in corporate debt restructuring, you say that fine, my debt is for 10 year for what 10 lakh rupees. Instead of 1 lakh rupees, I will pay you 50,000 rupees per month, and your tenure will increase to 20 months. But what you don't realize that for that amount you have to pay the additional interest amount also. So the corporate debt restructuring, it basically prolongs the lifetime of the debt, but at a higher interest rate. So corporate debt restructuring, it is done another way by when which the bank takes or the amount institution which is giving loan, it takes part in your equity. So if you have a debt of say 10 lakh rupees and they say fine, I will make your debt of 7 lakh rupees provided you give me the ownership of your companies to this amount. So corporate debt restructuring is a process by which companies they try to best manage their debts.
Thank you, ma'am. We have only these questions so far. And now I would
Ma'am,
request.
there's one more question.
Okay, please ask Rahul.
There's one more question concerning the current situation. Whatever the notifications that has come from the government side, they do not have a clarity and they are more inclined towards the MSMEs. So don't you think that they should have been restricted towards Section 240A, which primarily talks about the MSMEs. Had the benefit been only restricted towards them?
See, the benefit is not only to the MSMEs. When you hear the ministers speak and when you read the actual notification, there is lot of difference. Like even for the increase of default of 1 crore rupees, it is not given. It will be effective from when? What will happen to the existing cases? Right? So all these things are there which you need to follow. I mean, they have to test the court, how the courts will function.
Ma'am, another question is, what is debt to equity swap?
See, debt to equity swap is again, as I explained you, that there is a debt of 10 lakh rupees. You say that please reduce my debt to 7 lakh rupees and I will give you whatever the shares are worth 3 lakh rupees. So for your debt, you are swapping by giving out your equity. I own 100% of my company, right? And I have a loan of 10 lakh rupees and each share is worth, say, uh, uh, 100 rupees or so. So when I give take away, I don't not able to pay the debt of 3 lakh rupees, I become partner of 30% in your company. So debt to equity swap is done by that, and that is the ratio that you get.
Thank you, ma'am. That's all the question and answer session. And now I request Dean sir to kindly say a few words.
Fine. At the end of this online series on 5th day, I've gone through the entire lecture by ma'am, and it was really a very interesting lecture. And normally, the people who are delivering their speech lecture, they have got their own way. But the best speech is considered to be, particularly in law, when the speaker is able to tell about that, why this law, what this law is, and where is the law. And I think uh, Dr. Charu Mathur has justified this, right? She started from the paradigm shift taken place and what was Sikha in brief. She has put light on that also, and the why this particular act and what are the aims and objective behind it. She has given the backgrounds of this, what is the scheme of the act, and the entire procedure from up to NCLT, NCLT, and Supreme Court. And I think within this 1 hour lecture and less than 1 hour lecture, she has shown you the mirror what exactly is that. And at the last, when she has given what is the career behind this, those who opt for this, those who go for internship and specialization in particular act, when they say that career as the insolvency professional is before you. So I think this is the guidance for which you can opt, and you can opt for this course particularly. Now we are at the juncture today when I can congratulate Team MCS for organizing this series, particularly Chairperson Professor Dr. Poonam Rawat, President of the Society Anna Anupriya, Vice President Mohammad Danis Khan, its convener and instrumentality behind this series, Rahul Kumar Sharma, Secretary Gauri Agrawal, and now hosting today Yogi Chaudhary and the entire office bearer of the society. So you have done very well, and this was well organized.
Now I would request the Vice President of.
I think
Sir
sir.
is on mute. Sir is on mute.
Yes,
Mute is-
yes, yeah.
Now it's okay.
Yes, sir.
So it was mute from the very beginning.
No, no, sir. Well, some later part.
Okay, fine. So during this entire 5 days period, there have been 5 lectures. We started this series from alternative dispute resolution system, and the guest lecture was Miss Mumtaz S. Bhalla, also advocate on record on Supreme Court and partners at LNL Partners. Then on 21st May, the second lecture was on law of writs, which was taken by Mr. Ajit Sharma, also advocate on record Supreme Court. Then we have a lecture on doctrine of manifest arbitrariness, which was taken by Dr. Amit George, advocate High Court. Then last day we had a lecture on the basics of constitutionalism. Senior advocate Ms. Aswarya Bhati has taken that lecture, and today you have seen a lecture by Dr. Charu Mathur on insolvency and bankruptcy. So entire things have been in very organized manner. Once again, at this juncture, I would like to congratulate the team MCS for organizing these wonderful events. Thank you very much. All the blessings are with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And in the end, I would request the Vice President of Moot Court Society, Mohammed Danish, to kindly deliver a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, moderator. It is a matter of immense privilege for me to present a vote of thanks on behalf of the Moot Court Society, Law College, Dehradun. Without taking further time, I would begin by extending my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Charu Mathur, who agreed to join us and shared with us so generously her knowledge on the subject of today. On behalf of the attendees, I thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful learning experience.
Thank you.
Next, I would take the opportunity to thank University and College Administration, Professor Dr. Rajesh Bhamura sir and Poonam Rawat ma'am, a patron and chairperson respectively, who have been ever supporting to every endeavor we take upon. Thank you so much, sir and ma'am. Thirdly, I would also thank Youth Bar Association of India, who have provided us with the technical support needed to conduct this seminar. And last but not the least, I thank hundreds of the participants who joined us and attended this lecture, without which this learning experience would be incomplete. Thank you so much.